The title appears
Wow,
to
look at
draw
that
from a modern
bread! Fresh from
inspirational
the
tale,
oven. Help
popular
yourselves.
in
It
recent
smells
YouTube
incredible.
survival
Can't wait to
Viejo
try it.
pioneer storytelling channels about frontier ingenuity, where thick adobe, mud, walls, marked as weak or useless, prove their worth by retaining heat so effectively that bread bakes inside them even in extreme cold like -30 grados Fahrenheit. These stories often blend old Western pioneer themes with thermal mass principles. Here is a pure, old-style Western short story, 1,400 words. Inspired by that premise, set in the high plains frontier of the late 1800s American West, though adobe was more common in the Southwest, it fits the Spanish-Mexico flavor through cultural blending in places like New Mexico Territory or Colorado. Asterisco his neighbors called the mud walls useless, until they baked bread at 30 below. In the winter of 1887, the high plains north of Taos turned into a white hell. The wind came down off the Sangre de Cristo like a freight train loaded with knives, and the thermometer on Amos Reed's porch dropped to 30 below zero more nights than not. Men said the cold could freeze spit before it hit the ground, and horses stood in their corrals with icicles hanging from their nostrils like crystal daggers. Amos Reed was a quiet man, lean as a fence post, with hands calloused from adobe brick and a slow way of speaking that made folks think he was simple. He had come up from the Rio Grande Valley 5 years earlier, bringing nothing but a wagon of sun-baked bricks, a Mexican wife named Rosa, and 2 small boys who still spoke more Spanish than English. The other settlers, mostly hard-bitten men from Missouri and Illinois, built their cabins of squared logs chinked with mud and moss. They laughed when Amos started laying his thick adobe walls. Reed spilled in, himself a Mexican oven, Old Man Hargrove said one crisp October afternoon, leaning on his axe. Them mud walls won't they hold back a prairie wind. Come January he'll be begging it a bunk in my loft. The others joined him useless as teats on a boar hog, said young Cal Withers. Adobe's for hot countries. Up here it'll just crack and let the devil's own breath in. Amos never argued. It just kept working. Mixing straw into the mud, forming bricks in wooden frames, letting them cure in the low autumn sun. Rosa helped, her shawl tied around her shoulders, pressing the bricks smooth with hands that knew the work from her grandmother's courtyard in Chihuahua. The boys carried water and straw, their cheeks red as apples. By November the walls stood 8 feet high, 2 feet thick at the base, tapering slightly inward. Amos set heavy vigas, pine beams hauled from the mountains. For the roof, then laid smaller poles and brush, and finally packed it all with more adobe mud. He built a low, rounded horno, the outdoor oven of his wife's people, against the south wall, but the real secret was inside, a great hearth of flat river stones set into the adobe, with flues that ran through the thick walls like veins. Rosa had shown him how her uncles built in the old way, thermal mass, they called it in books Amos had never read. The walls drank heat like a thirsty man drinks water, then gave it back slow and steady. The neighbors finished their log houses and laughed again when Amos whitewashed his adobe walls with lime. Looks like a damn pueblo, Hargrove said. Reed figures is living in Santa Fe. December came bitter. Snow drifted against the walls in great white waves. The wind howled day and night. Inside the log cabins, folks burned pine nuts and buffalo chips until their eyes smarted, but the cold still crept through the chinks. Children coughed through the nights, and men woke with frost on their mustaches. Amos' house stayed different. The hearth fire burned low but steady, cottonwood and pinyon, nothing fancy. The thick adobe walls soaked up every flicker of heat. By morning the inside air was warm enough to sit without a coat. Rosa baked tortillas on the como, and the smell drifted out the door like a promise. One night in mid-January the mercury hit 32 below. The wind died at dusk, leaving a silence so deep it hurt the ears. Hargrove's cabin creaked like an old ship, his wife wrapped the baby in every blanket they owned. At Amos' place, the boys played on the packed earth floor in their shirt sleeves. Rosa rose before dawn. She had kneaded dough the night before. Flour from the trading post at Taos, a pinch of salt, water from the melted snow. She shaped the loaves round and flat, scored them with a knife, and carried them outside to the horno. But the cold was too fierce, the wind had come back, and the oven's mouth was drifted over with snow. She looked at the thick south wall of the house, where the hearth flue ran through. Amos, she said softly. The wall is worn. Like the hornos of my abuela. I understood. Together they cut a small opening in the adobe, low, near the hearth, big enough for a bread peel. Rosa slid the loaves inside, right into the wall itself. The adobe was warm, almost hot to the touch, holding the fetus memory from the night before. She sealed the opening with a flat stone and waited. 2 hours later the smell came, yeast and crust and the faint sweetness of pinyon smoke that had seeped into the mud. When they pulled the loaves out, the crust was golden, crisp, and perfect. The inside was soft, steaming in the frozen air. Word spread fast. Cal Withers came first, drawn by the smell as he chopped ice from his horse trough. Ace stood at the door, hat in hand, snow on his boots. "Reed," he said, "I ain't one to beg, but my woman's got no fire left and the young un's cryin'. Can I trouble you for a scrap of that bread?" Amos cut a thick slice, spread it with lard Rosa had rendered, and handed it over. Cal bit in, eyes closing. "Lord Almighty," he whispered. "It's like summer in my mouth." By noon half the settlement had come. Hargrove arrived last, beard iced over, pride warring with hunger. "I called them walls useless," he admitted, voice rough. "I was wrong. They ain't useless. They re a damn miracle." Amos only nodded. "They hold heat," he said simply. "Like the old Spanish houses down on the river. Rosa taught me. That winter broke records for cold. Men lost fingers to frostbite, cattle froze standing up, and the mail rider didn't they come for 6 weeks. Back in Amos Reed's adobe house, the hearth burned low, the walls gave back their warmth, and bread baked steady, even at 30 below. Come spring the neighbors stopped laughing. Some asked Amos to show them how to build the flues right, how to mix the mud so it wouldn't they crack. He never charged a dime, just asked for help hauling vigas or sharing seed corn. Years later, when the railroad pushed through and the big ranches came, folks still told the story around stoves in town. How Amos Reed built with mud when everyone else used logs. How the neighbors mocked him until the cold proved who was right. And when a traveler asked why the old adobe house still stood when others had fallen to ruin, the old-timers would smile. Because them walls learned to hold the fire, they say. And feet is what keeps a man alive when the devil himself blows cold. Rosa lived to see her grandchildren play in the same warm rooms. Amos died peaceful, 83, with the smell of fresh bread in the air. They buried him on the hill behind the house, facing south toward Mexico, where the sun still bakes the earth golden. The adobe walls stand yet, thick, quiet, useless no more. Word count, 1412.